So today we finally heard from Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in the form of two letters he sent to members of Congress. He explained why two flags associated with the insurrection flew at his two homes, refused their request to recuse from current cases related to Donald Trump and January 6th before the court. There is one key figure we have not heard from yet. That's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who has said nothing about the myriad scandals that are undermining Americans' confidence in his court. Roberts has not responded to two top Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee who wrote him last week asking he ensure Alito recuses himself and requesting a meeting as soon as possible to discuss other steps to, quote, address the Supreme Court's ethics crisis. Congressman Dan Goldman's a Democrat in New York. He, along with Congressman Hank Johnson, authored a letter to Justice Alito calling on him to recuse. The letter was signed by 43 of his colleagues, and he joins me now. Well, you got a response.
Yeah.
What is your response to the response?
It's pretty shocking. The fact that Justice Alito thinks that he can be the judge and jury of his own impartiality flies in the face of Supreme Court precedent, flies in the face of the Constitution, flies in the face of federal law, and completely misapplies the standard that he is supposed to be applying, even given the fact that there's no binding code of ethics on him, and he essentially gets to decide this himself. But the standard is whether a reasonable person, or whether a person could reasonably think that he has some degree of a bias or partiality. It is not whether he does or doesn't.
Right.
It is whether it is reasonable for someone to conclude that he has an appearance of a conflict of interest. And for him to actually say in this letter that it is completely unreasonable for anyone to think that when he flies a Stop the Steal flag, or a Stop the Steal flag is flying from his home, that somehow is not reasonable 11 days after, or the January 6th, to think that he has some political bias about a case related to Stop the Steal that flag and January 6th is just bewildering.
Yeah, I mean, his argument is, my wife did all this, and she's an independent woman she co-owns our house. He says at one point in the letter, I can't, she has a right to do whatever she wants, the property. So I can't control it at all. And therefore, no reasonable person, unless someone with an ideological bias, could think that I have to recuse, therefore I won't. But at a deeper constitutional level, it seems to me that, again, all this stuff is pointing towards this real sort of constitutional standoff between the branches. I mean, their assertion, the court's current assertion is, you can't make us do anything. We are an independent branch, and no one can make us recuse about anything, and, you should go take a long walk off a short pier, Congressman.
Well, right.
I mean, that's really what they think.
100%, which is baffling given the jurisdiction that Congress has conferred on the Supreme Court, the funding that we give to the judiciary as a co-equal branch. We obviously have oversight and leverage over the Supreme Court. Otherwise, we don't have co-equal branches of government. But even under the Supreme Court's precedent itself, recently, a judge's spouse is sufficient to implicate a judge in whatever conflict of interest there may be. This is not old, 100-year-old. This was Justice Kennedy. And Jamie Raskin, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, has a terrific op-ed in the New York Times, which really goes through the actual case law as to why it is not just up to Justice Alito and the Supreme Court with their non-binding advisory code of ethics, unlike every other judge in the land, but that they are actually required to recuse if, in a circumstance like this, there is an obvious and reasonable appearance of a conflict of interest. It doesn't have to be an actual conflict.
Right.
An appearance is enough. And it is absurd for Justice Alito and, frankly, Justice Thomas as well, given that his wife was involved.
Gave testimony to the January 6th committee.
And was involved texting Mark Meadows related to the same conduct, the same facts that are before this court in two cases.
Yeah.
It's not just that they have a bias toward Donald Trump, so any executive action that Donald Trump made, you would do. It is the same factual pattern that is before the court that, if you believe Justice Alito, both of their spouses made political statements about. That is obvious, and at a minimum, it is reasonable to think that there is an appearance.
Yeah, there's obviously the federal criminal case against Donald Trump for his conduct up to, in the aftermath of the election up to January 6th. There's also this Fisher case before the court about one of the charges, which is conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, which is before the court as well. I guess the next question is, it is notable to me, you guys wrote to Alito, right? On the House side. The Senate Judiciary wrote to Roberts. Mm-hmm. And they got a letter back from Alito, which itself is kind of wild.
Look,
I mean, they didn't write to Alito. They wrote to Roberts. They got a letter back from Alito. It's like, okay, Justice Roberts, you're the person who comes before the court annually when he does, when he comes before Congress to ask for funding, whatever. Like, we want to talk to you. And so far, nothing.
It underscores the problem that the Supreme Court has right now, which is that technically, Chief Justice Roberts doesn't actually have any authority over Justice Alito to require him to recuse, other than as part of a larger court decision, if there were to be a request. But what is shocking about this is that we are now on the precipice of an irreparable, harmful decision by two justices who, to any other federal judge in the country, would recuse. And it is up to Chief Justice Roberts to save the court's legitimacy right now. And for him to not respond to Senator Durbin and Senator Whitehouse, and instead for Alito to respond to them, is truly flouting Congress's oversight authority and Congress's role as a co-equal branch. And it does not bode well for what is to come over the next few weeks, when I think the biggest travesty in Supreme Court history may occur if these two justices rule on cases about which they are clearly conflicted.
I mean, I think Plessy and Korematsu is still...
Fair enough. The biggest ethical.
Yes, okay.
Ethical.
I just want to be clear on that.
Ethical
Congressman
tragedy.
Dan Goldman, it's great to have you. Thank you very much.